And I think, hello and welcome to Tomorrow Tonight. I'm John from Broadsheet. We're very honoured to have with us human rights lawyer David Langwallner. Good morning, David.
You know, you're curtailing all of any dalliances of too much wine on a Friday night, having to prepare and get up for this.
I know. The reason we do this in the mornings on Saturday is because David goes to bed at about 8, 9 o'clock.
I think that was a misrepresentation. I think about 9.
About 9. Okay.
Yeah, I get up at about 5.
So you miss the Late Late Show every Friday. That's terrible, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. It's such a tragedy. Yeah.
We've loads to talk about. Will we go straight to the papers?
Sure. Yeah.
You cover just the second. How are you, David?
Not fine. Quite tired in a way because I've had a busy week in court, but I'm still fine. Yeah.
And you had an excellent piece in yesterday on the site. We go through that just when we've done the papers. Irish Daily Mail couples the new COVID-19 victims. Councillors flooded with pleas for help.
Well, I mean, of course, I mean, the collateral, I hate that word, but the mental health, physical health deterioration of relationship structures. You see in Britain a whole rise in coercive behavior, domestic violence. Now, I'm not obviously condoning any of this, but of course, people are proverbially throwing pots and pans at each other as income structures collapse, as they're forced into unhealthy, constant close proximity with each other. I don't mean, I mean, relationships thrive to some degree by people having their own independent existences outside of those relationships. So is it any wonder that in day 334, or whatever it is, I think the Mail has been having like a tabulation or a documentation of how many days this has been going on for, that there is a rise in domestic violence and is a rise in breakdown in relationship structures, which is all part of the misery that has been created by the whole COVID thing. And thus, people are victims or trapped in history, victims of circumstance sometimes. What might have been brilliant relationships, rock solid relationships, are now, and this is the tragedy of everything. It's like you meet someone at one point in their life and they're very, very grounded, which is where I am in my life at the moment, knowing what I want to do, doing it well, and I'm grounded again. But I have been ungrounded at given points in time. And people are in a vortex of a situation where even the strongest relationships must be under enormous strain because of all of this.
Yeah. It's traumatic what's going on, isn't it?
Well, it is almost like in medical terms, like a post-traumatic stress disorder type situation.
Yeah, but it's not post.
It's injuries litigation as well. Yeah.
It's just not post-traumatic. I mean, the trauma is kind of almost.
Oh no, sorry. Yes, it was an analogy. Yeah.
Harry and Meghan stripped of royal duties. Are you interested in any of that?
It's interesting. The only thing I will say, it's interesting they juxtapose couples relationships with Harry and Meghan stripped of all duties. I mean, it's a clever juxtaposition.
The Irish Examiner: security fence at the house of the Health Minister, Stephen Donnelly, has been built. Objects thrown at family home. I think this is a bizarre story, really. A security fence has been erected outside Health Minister Stephen Donnelly's home after.
One would have thought if he had done that there would be some definitive levels of threat to him, family, or his life, for whatever reason. As a lawyer, a human rights lawyer, I've had my fair share of threats, and they're very, very upsetting to you and your loved ones. And it is only a human response that he would do something like that. So I'm sure that there's a level of intelligence that he has communicated to the appropriate authorities, or they have communicated to him, warranting him taking this action.
Yeah, but who? I just don't sense that there's that violence in the air towards him.
Well, that's why. Well, I mean, the health minister. It's like Harry Truman's famous comment: "The buck stops here," and it's always the person in the vanguard of, like poor Brian Lenihan Jr. Finance when the shit hits the fan in 2008. You're the focus of all the awfulness, and the health minister must be the focus of considerable public disgruntlement. Who'd want to be a politician?
Yeah, but I don't think that's spilling over into, well, I suppose, as you say, he's
I
got to
don't know. I don't know the precise circumstance behind it. There is another article in the Examiner I think we should look at. Yeah, David McWilliams also, I think, wrote something about the rise and the need to tackle the drug trade. And
okay, that's actually in the Irish Times, David. 1 second, I'm just getting onto that here now. Great picture of a frog in County Wicklow there, looking
somewhat blurred. Is the frog out of its natural habitat now, and it's having difficulty in environmental terms surviving? Is that what it is?
Yeah, it does have a Trump quality about it.
Yeah, it's like a caricature frog in a way.
Yeah, it is. It's like a British political cartoon or something.
COVID-19, like something by Scarface or something like that.
COVID-19 infections and hospital staff down 90% since rollout of vaccines.
Well, that's good news, isn't it?
I guess there's a lot of that over the last few weeks. It's like,
well, there's a sense in Britain that that this wave of the pandemic is being kept under control, and certainly the British authorities have had a good track record in this wave of COVID, which hasn't been true and replicated in Europe. But
I think our commenters would disagree with you, but I think that would be more kind of a nationalist position rather than.
Well, I at this stage, I straddle both sides of the argument, and I really have no time for petty Irish nationalist bashing of the Brits for the sake of it, you know? And we're all in this together in a way.
Yeah. Well, habits are hard to break, I think, and certainly on that front. Habits are hard to break on that front, you know.
Well, yeah, but
England's Ireland's opportunity, isn't it? The England's
yeah, well,
David McWilliams, the economics of the drugs trade and the case for legislation.
It is a suggestion for tough legislation to deal with the drugs trade, and there is no doubt. I mean, I did a major drugs case recently, and or I'm in the process of so doing.
Yeah.
And
your case is interesting, David, because it involves a 14-year-old boy.
Well, yeah, I'm very concerned about the corruption of younger people, the Quixote phenomenon from South America in the 1970s, and the way that there seems
Mules.
Yes, but the problem is McWilliams' neoliberal looks at a kind of Rudy Giuliani clean the situation up perspective. Whereas, of course, the reality of the matter is it is chronic levels of, it's not just personal responsibility, it is chronic levels of underinvestment, opportunity, ghettoization, that also, which the neoliberal austerity model never counteracts properly. So any resolution of it has to be not just legislative, it has to be investment driven and systemic. And that's point number one. The other point, I think, there's probably the world's leading commentator in all of this is the Italian Savioni, who's been run out of Italy because of Mora. And subsequent to that book, he wrote a book called 000, which I think is even more effective. And he's pointing out, which is something Mr. McWilliams should take on board, that the yes boss hierarchical streamlining corporate nature of the drugs culture is merely a mimic and an interplay with the way corporatization in general is creating these hierarchical structures of abuse. And it is noticeable that in this awful misery of the last year, it is the transnational corporations, multinational corporations who have gained huge amounts financially. And one doesn't see it. This is the crucial point. One doesn't see any of that gain. We see it exported out of Ireland to vulture funds. We see none of it into the country for the purpose of tackling the very real drug problem in the country. The money is not reinvested for the purpose of structural change. So when Mr. McDougall talks, for example, as he did, separately about Smithfield and the need for urban regeneration, I couldn't agree with him more. The Ballymont tower blocks led to the drug problem. People need affordable, good housing. But the point is, in order to do that, you have to reinvest in people and give them habitable spaces. So if you create urban regeneration, encourage them to paint their houses blue and yellow, they have to be proper little structural houses that people are enabled to work in a humanized fashion.
Yeah.
So again, Mac Williams' take on this is a superficial take.
Okay, and your take vis-a-vis your client, I don't want to talk about the case particularly.
Well,
but you're talking about basically child soldiers.
Anonymized in general, but
yeah, but David, you're talking about child soldiers in these.
Well, I think that seems to be a cultural phenomenon in Ireland, in Britain. It was the case historically, I think, in Brazil. There's a film from the 1970s called Pixotti made about this. And it is the coercive exploitation of children. And it's extraordinarily worrying. But just to repeat, if you solve this problem not just by getting tough on crime and tough legislation, you solve it by infrastructural investment of monies that are being gained by transnational corporations funneled back into urban regeneration and urban planning for the purpose of alleviating these horrible social problems. Now, that makes me sound like the big wet I am. Well, fair. That's what.
Okay. The Irish Sun, Ulster Bank leaving Ireland, banks for nothing, Ulster exit will lead to higher.
This is extraordinarily worrying stuff. Danske Bank left the country after liquidating its portfolio and its whatever they call it, its asset thing.
Loan book.
Its loan book. And then they factor it on to people like Cerberus, fronted by Goldman Sachs, these vulture funds, for the further liquidation of lives. And there's been a lot of irresponsible, including by Varadkar, approval of vulture funds. There is nothing good about these people whatsoever.
Well, Noonan said it was vital for the ecosystem. Vultures were vital for the ecosystem.
Well, you know, why? Vultures kill people. If you ever look at sort of like films of vultures, a vulture by definition is someone who takes advantage of a situation and preys on people's misery and weakness.
When you're dead as well. I mean, they pick apart when you're dead.
Well, you know, perhaps Mr. Noonan and indeed Mr. Fred could consider to what extent they are vultures taking advantage of people.
Indeed. The Evening Echo, which is the Cork evening paper, like someone placed a bomb under the car, teenage driver fled scene of crash to kill a girl at 16. It's kind of a local story, won't get into that. Again, these ads for the addiction centres and
well, I mean, that is I mean, one hesitates to look at this, but I mean, but if people are boxed up, which is Sumption's point, we're talking about the deterioration necessarily of their. Now, I'm privileged and I'm conscious of that in one way, that I have very interesting things to do. My mind is completely occupied, and I'm in an area where I can walk and without some of the restrictions, and exercise and so on. But it is understandable that people who are put in dehumanized situations will resort to, marriages will break up, relationships will break up, and now people will develop addiction problems. One is not just to focus on questions of individual personal responsibility. Sometimes it takes enormous amounts of personal effort to build yourself out of a situation which is coming on top of you. And that is why I wrote that piece about Drew Harris as well. When you talk about prosecuting people for, in a bogus way, except going for a dental appointment in Spain because they want a holiday in Tenerife. Now, you might say, well, that's irresponsible. And of course it is. It's also illegal. But it doesn't deserve the level of moral outrage it got. Because if people are being put in situations like battery hens in boxes, then no doubt relationships break up. If they're facing vulture funds repossessing their houses, no doubt relationships break up. And no doubt they develop addiction problems. And also to advertise it is, again, a dangerous thing.
The Daily Telegraph, families will be able to meet next month.
Well, that's good.
Extraordinary headline, isn't it? Can you imagine that headline?
No, you couldn't. I mean, the whole universe is altered. I mean, it is almost like a spectator on on disaster.
Yeah,
I'm often reminded of there's a great German writer, Victor Klemperer, who wrote a book chronicling the gradual insidious decline in Germany, a whole diary on it. And one senses the fantastical and outlandish nature of these sort of things. Having said that, at least the Brits are liberalizing and allowing a degree of responsible social interaction.
Yeah, it's funny, you can see
the effect of that will be to negate the addiction problems and negate the marital relationship problems and the domestic.
Yeah, and yeah,
or at least alleviate.
Indeed. Again, a funny juxtaposition with the photograph and the headline. The Times.
He seems like a very nice fellow, though, Prince Harry. I've never met him, but he says a lot of very sensible things sometimes.
Okay. Jam Boy, the Good Dog Guide. Huge dog pet ownership thing. Pet ownership during the pandemic has increased.
Of dogs.
Dogs, yeah.
Well, I mean, isn't that a self-help strategy that people at least better to be addicted to Labradors than to be addicted to a couple of bottles of red wine? It's a much more sensible thing. Let's hope the dog doesn't bark again. Just to, of course, as long as the dogs are not like trophy dogs, and that they are taken care of responsibly. I mean, that's an important point.
Well, Harry and Meghan hit back at loss of royal roles. Key 8 to PM resigns from number 10. Dominic Cummings, most senior Romanian ally. Meghan and Harry officially walk away.
Well, that's a very glamorous dress, I must say.
Yeah, I think that may be when they're in Ireland, actually.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah, outrageous PM poised to break foreign aid pledge. Now you can begin to see how post-Brexit world is going to.
Yeah. I think that's like an epiphany, really, isn't it? It is going to be the retreat in all national autarky, restrictions on travel, which we might deal with later, and the retreat into your own dominion and your own domain. And you can see, therefore, that the milk of human kindness should be distributed to people within the culture as opposed to foreign aid, since, in a sense, the horrors and barbarities in other parts of the world are being mirrored throughout the world. It also, I think, copper fastens Varoufakis's point that the EU is going to implode, because the whole logic of a transnational cooperative communitarian organization, ostensibly, and I stress the term ostensibly, is defeated by all of this.
Yeah, it's but we've heard the kind of the demise of EU for years, though. Really, it seems to be sort of sturdier than.
Well, for how much longer? All things must pass. All trading blocks have historically come to an end. After a period, the Hanseatic League, after a period of time, and it will need robust change to survive. And of course, you've got the rise of extreme fascist entities within the EU, which undermines the very ethos.
Yeah, FT weekend, how to leave lockdown safely and for good. You get a sense that it will come into an end of something anyway.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, one of the points Sumption makes, and we'll talk about him more in detail later, again, without quoting him like the Bible or something like that, is that, but it's a point I've separately made, we're going to live in a permanent state of pandemic, with pandemics to come and variations to come, because of the way we've screwed up Gaia. So the extent to which there will be opening up seems to me it will be limited, in that there is no doubt that the world of free travel, of mass migration, of intercultural exchanges and political exchanges, in terms of physicality, but being there, going there, all of that is now, I think, permanently altered.
But America is kind of reaching out again through Biden. America's back to repair battered NATO alliance and back in the WHO and all that. And do you sense? I don't want to get conspiratorial, but do you feel an air of unreality about the Biden presidency at the moment?
Well, I mean, the only thing I would say is I wouldn't say unreality, but I mean he is the president of the United States. But I think the way America has shifted so far in one particular direction over a number of years means that very little substantive change will be implemented. I mean, I hope to be proved wrong, that there will be some adherence to the Kyoto Accords, but the whole business of America is business, as Henry Ford would say, and I don't think the Liberals or the Republicans are any different. I mean, it is a time for Marshall plans. I know you attacked me last week about the New Deal being a historic thing, but it is a time for America to play that kind of Marshall Plan leadership transnational role in a way. But where's the money coming from? And I don't see it.
And where's the common enemy? It was Russia, Soviet Union provided that.
The Marshall Plan was about reconstruction.
And it was also about protecting Europe from the Soviet Union. Yeah, I mean, it was a Soviet issue as much as a helping fellow man.
Well, yeah, I suppose that is right. But if you look at internal helping the fellow man, which was the New Deal of the 1930s, that is what the world needs, a form of reconstruction. Yeah. And if America plays a leadership role in that, well, all well and good. But
okay, Daily Star. You get a subscription, I know, but
yeah, that's
perhaps you can tell us about the Beaver Mayhem story, David.
No, I can't. I don't know what it is. No.
Quickly,
although I do know that the royal couple seem to be having. I mean, you've got to understand that they're just a young couple in a way, and the amount of intrusion in their private life and personal relationships must be driving them crackers.
Yeah, sure, but David, they're certainly not a normal couple. I mean, come on, it's.
Well, what is a normal couple? I mean, they're
they're the couple who are throwing pots and pans at each other at the moment.
Well, so is according to everybody else. I mean, and so that is the coercive domestic meltdown and one should not make light of.
Yeah, I know. I was just going to say that actually. It's too early to.
I mean, relationships are, to reiterate, under tremendous strain. Personal, professional, all sorts of relationships are under considerable strain.
Yeah, our relationship has strengthened, I feel, David, through this.
Hey, let's not get that misconstrued. Can we talk about travel passport thing, which we seem to have glossed over?
Sure, but we can do that through the assumption thing if we can go into that.
Just briefly, if someone just looks at this.
Yeah, of course.
The Irish government are now not reissuing passports for the first
time. Of course, yeah.
And they're also making moo-moo sounds that travel will not resume in any normalized form until July. And that's a provisional estimate. And I think the Brits have said May as a provisional.
And passport renewal isn't possible at the moment unless.
Well, that's the point. And if that is the case, I think that is again to anticipate.
That's been the case for about 10 months actually with the passport office. Sorry.
Yeah, I know, but one sense a creeping sense of the restrictions in people's movement and travel worldwide.
Yeah,
and that's just an indicia of that.
Yeah. And if you can't renew your passport, you are technically like a prisoner on the island,
Well, I mean, it's like the worldwide panopticon at this stage, in a way, in that it's just different responses of different jurisdictions to enable people a measure of liberty and freedom and humanization, which I think Lord Sumption is arguing for. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah. So do you think that they'll say, well, we'll give you a passport, but must have a kind of a vaccine element to it?
Well, I mean, it's the ID card thing again. You'll have a passport it'll know your date of birth, the usual stuff. It'll probably know be able to x-ray you or something and work out all your conditions, all your data, all your financial information. These are measures of control which are very, very dangerous.
Yeah. Let's on that note.
But I mean, that is maybe deemed to be slightly alarmist, save that Zuboff, in the age of surveillance capitalism, the Harvard professor, has written an epoch-defining book suggesting how much of our data is being mined, both by governmental entities and corporate entities. We cannot see them introducing a new form of passport without at least health, COVID, other things on it.
Yes, yeah, that's but and it's a global thing. Just on that, you'll have heard David mention the name Sumption a few times, and also in his pieces. This is Jonathan Sumption, who's a lord, on the Supreme Court. Are all the Supreme Court members lords? Are they all? They're all.
Well, they're now called the Supreme Court. Everyone's got democratic. They were called lords. And I think he retired as a Supreme Court judge rather than he may have been appointed as a law lord. I don't know.
Well, in Britain. He is the most kind of mainstream voice opposed to the restrictions, opposed to the lockdowns. That's getting any airing really.
Well, yeah, and what he says is most interesting, but not completely devoid of the necessity for a degree of critique.
Okay, can I give you one quote then, just on this, what he writes?
Are we talking about him now?
We're talking about Sumption now. That's okay.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
I thought the quote that struck me from his piece, he wrote a piece in the Telegraph. It's behind a paywall, sadly, but many people believe that it's okay to be like China for a time, because when the crisis ends, we can go back to being like Britain again, or Ireland. These people are making a serious mistake. We cannot switch in and out of totalitarianism at will, because a free society is a question of attitude. It is dead once the attitude changes, which is very insightful, because that's...
Yes, it is, yeah.
That's the thing, isn't it?
Well, I've taken this very seriously because I knew you wanted to ask about it. And I wrote a piece on him in Cassandra Voices, which was at an earlier incarnation of the lockdown and part of the Public Intellectual series. And I've been following what he said subsequently, evident from Esham, I don't know from Adam, but it seems to be a number of things. First of all, Sumption is a neoliberal, and therefore, and he's intellectually consistent. So therefore, he is horrified, rightly so, at the restrictions on liberty and freedom of movement, which are creating an uncivilized society. And he's gone on record of saying we're on the slippery slope towards the creation of a police state. And in fact, he has also been intellectually consistent about that for a number of years. In his book on the trial of courts and politics, he wrote a book about 2 years ago. He also has warned about this gradual encroachment by the state, by the Leviathan in people's personal lives. The pandemic has opened that up. Now, that is both noble, correct of him to be saying so. The other point that he's making, that you've just addressed, is his form of neoliberalism, based on Margaret Thatcher and so on. At one level, as he perceives it, and being non-judgmental, was a form of humanized or capitalism, or at least capitalism that gave initiatives, measures of social protection, and so on. His concern is that the pandemic is creating exactly what Thatcher was concerned about, the road to serfdom, which was her critique of socialist totalitarianism, borrowed from the Austrian jurist Hayek, or he wasn't a jurist, economist Hayek. And Sumption's concern, therefore, is we're developing a new form of serfdom in a way which is Chinese capitalism. And Chinese capitalism is not a respecter of civil liberties. Look what they've just done to Hong Kong. And if people are all in little boxes and little houses with restrictions on their movement, then where goes freedom, as Sumption would say. Now, all of that seems like I'm totally on the same webpage, or him, she is. But liberalism has always had a contradiction between liberals who believe in freedom and liberals who believe in equality, what's called egalitarian liberalism. John Rawls, Roland Dworkin, the need for a just society. The question becomes, if you look at it through the other thing that Sumption isn't seemingly as centrally focused on, is the restriction on people's livelihoods, and the destruction of small and medium enterprises by the pandemic, by the forced quarantine and social isolation, and people's ability to earn a living, which is a classic Thatcherite idea: get on your bike.
Mm-hmm.
This is what people like Norman Tebbit had for small businesses.
Yeah.
And we also are now seeing a situation where wealth has been concentrated in ever fewer hands, and transnational corporate entities are gaining more and more out of the pandemic for whatever reason. Or for whatever, how are they making their money when many of the retail industry, the hospitality and the leisure centre and everybody else is being destroyed? So I think we need to look at the equality-driven aspect of liberalism if we're talking about the new society that may emerge from this, which is not just about people's security. People have an innate desire for security, and the pandemic threat has increase that sense of focus on the essentials. But, you know, security is one thing: food, shelter, housing, but not if, and Sumption's right about this, not if the quality of life, of liberty and movement and recreation, and he spoke about the arts as well, not if the dynamism of the culture is undermined by excessive levels of security. If you're Al Vivi in China, the famous artist, you don't have a right to freedom of speech, or if you do, they lock you up. Same applied to, you know, Sakharov in Russia historically. And there is no doubt that Chinese capitalism is a form of kind of capitalist totalitarianism or corporate totalitarianism. And Sumption, even from a neoliberal perspective, regards this as an outrage, as I do. But he should also, I think, focus perhaps more so on questions of housing and healthcare and the other wing of liberalism, not just quality.
That's fascinating, David. I think the thing about Sumption's piece this week was that it was I think it was kind of a landmark piece, because he really did go quite far in terms of this is a huge warning to.
He is definitive. I don't know, but he is what he must know.
Yeah.
As a quintessential member of the highest ranks of the British establishment.
Yeah. It's almost what he didn't write, you know. You can sort of.
Yeah, I suspect he's talking in code or mute, and for someone who is a Tory grandee in a way, or a Liberal grandee, he's a little unclassifiable. But for someone to talk in such muted code that way and be so trenchant,
yeah,
there's more. One other point he made, which I think is extremely important: there seems to be no end in sight for pandemics to come, if I could put it in those crisp terms. In other words, if this pandemic goes away or other variants of it are controlled, we're going to be living in a state of siege, of pandemic control. And the dangers of that are that the concept of restrictions on civil rights and civil liberties and human rights becomes embedded over time, and people become conditioned to accept things. And then Sumption's other point, now remember, the man is a major historian and not a minor historian. He's written, I haven't read it, he's written this 4-volume history book, which has been, and he trained as a historian, which is supposedly wonderful, even by conventional historians' assessments. And I also, in a much more minor key, have an acute sense of history, and it's actually evaporating from the technical professions at the moment. But the point he's making historically about plagues is very important. And I wrote something on this, I think, in the Village magazine, which is, if you look at this plague and you compare it to the Black Death, you compare it to the flu at the end of the Second World War, or First World War, people were wiped out. Millions died. And the question then becomes, yes, this is bad, but why are we reacting in such a disproportionate, unmeasured fashion to it, where we're destroying people's livelihoods and liberties?
But David, he doesn't actually sort of go beyond that, though. He doesn't just speculate that who
No,
is.
he doesn't decode the code.
Yeah, but
He's obviously very concerned that there has been that the sense of, if you read between the lines, he's concerned that the sense of security that has now been engendered in people and the need to protect themselves and stay safe with a social order which is creating an uncivilized morass, where we're under permanent or semi-permanent or spasmodic or episodic threats to collectively to our individual survival and collective survival, will facilitate the ground for a kind of permanent state of emergency, which the great German jurist Carl Schmitt warned about. Oh, he was not a nice person in a way because he became a Nazi, but before he
was
did,
a Nazi, wasn't he, Schmidt?
yeah, but before that happened, he talked about judge the ideas, not the man. He talked about the dangers, foreshadowing things, of a permanent state of exceptionalism and emergency, and that is in effect what Sumption is saying. That look, this stuff will create quite apart from the effect on people's mental and physical health.
Yeah.
The effect on liberty and movement, and also the other.
David, he doesn't really address who and why this is happening, and who are behind it. Yeah, okay.
I don't know what he knows. I mean, I'm a mere humble supplicant in all of this.
No, but I mean, it does, beg the question, and I think that's the unsaid part of the piece.
Well, I mean, he may be shape of things to come. He may know more than he actually is. I'm sure he does. But the other point he's making, I think, which is worth addressing, is populism. Now, obviously, Sumption is a form of elitist, and the word elitism often gets a bad rep. There's nothing wrong with being slightly elitist or having your views taken seriously if you're Jonathan Bloody Sumption. I mean, the man has earned his spurs at all sorts of levels to talk authoritatively about certain things. But his concern is that democracy has become demagogic, what he sees as excessively populist. And his concern is that the leaders of the democracy worldwide are giving in to populist agendas rather than taking the sort of principled approaches, and that they need to do so. And also, I think another very important point, which hasn't been central to what he said so far, is the concern about privacy in all of its dimensions. The concern about the monitoring of our daily activities, the concern about the monitoring of what we say, who we say, the concern about the Leviathan, and the Chinese form of capitalism. I mean, he said it succinctly and correctly. The Chinese form of capitalism is serfdom and totalitarianism. It's exactly what Margaret Thatcher and Friedrich Hayek warned about, which is not, of course, to say that I endorse that position at all. But I don't. But I do see that it is very strange, isn't it, that that insight is now being put across by Lord Sumption.
We've now completely gone over the time, but I just want to briefly return to your column, which is on the site today, and throwing the innocents to the lines. Very interesting piece in it that you represented the girl,
one of
the girls who were the Give Up Your Elsins, the voices of the ladies of the school children. So having been, the church hadn't got enough out of them.
Well, I mean, I suppose the overarching thesis is this, that, the weak suffer that they most. It isn't just about religious exploitation or corporate exploitation. It's a question of, if you're in a vulnerable position or a vulnerable adult, and you don't have equality of bargaining power in a way, or a high enough opinion of yourself, and if you can be mined for exploitation. You
got them some money though.
Yeah, a small moiety. Yeah, a significant amount from her point of view. A small moiety. But it was interesting. The settlement came from EMI in Britain.
Yeah,
not from the church or EMI in Ireland. And it says something about, I hope people don't perceive it to be. It's not meant to be an anti-Christian piece. In fact, it's a pro-Christian piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't sense of it.
Yeah. It is the sense that
we're all Christians, and they're living.
We should focus on giving little and vulnerable people at least a quality of existence. If they deserve it and warrant it, most people do, and all God's children have wings and hidden talents and so on, and those talents should not be exploited. On a kick up my ass, in a way, I was reading the lovely comments people said about it, and then someone really stuck the boot in. So I think just as I...
What do they say? What do they say, David? They said this is the worst piece I've ever read.
Yeah. After everyone said it was a great piece, this
yeah,
worst piece. So I think just as I or Lord Sumption or anybody else on this planet would should understand that we shouldn't take criticism personally, but we should also look at who the critic is.
Well, yeah.
Why they're criticizing, and one does feel as well that critics are a bit like the famous quote. He who does, he who doesn't teaches. And critics are almost like a level below that in a way.
I don't know. Our commenters are.
They're savage.
They regard themselves as doers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ones that they really like are the ones that are just, the upward level of light serious. Maybe that's all they can stand. I don't know. And most of them have been incredibly well received. I'm delighted. But one, and this one has been incredibly well received. But it just seems like Vox Populis, back to Sumption's comment about populism, and perhaps this is why Sumption's drip feeding the message can only take a certain amount.
Yeah, I would disagree with him about populism. I just want to say that, you can't.
Well, it depends what you mean by populism.
Yeah, well, this is it.
Populism and demagoguery are different things.
Yeah.
Democracy invites the notion of populism.
Well, anything they don't like, they call populist. People are against water charges, populist.
Well, yes, and sometimes populism is right.
I would say, yeah.
I mean, if you look at it historically, it was an agrarian movement for the common man in America. People like the state of Minnesota, people like Hubert Humphreys, Walter Mondale, were part of that tradition that came of, indeed, I think Bernie Sanders, by implication, popular socialist democracy. So it's not all bad. But then again, the real ambivalence of populism in America was that you also had it fused with religious fundamentalism through the prism of the character of William Jennings Bryan, thrice defeated candidate for the presidency of the United States, an agrarian socialist and religious fundamentalist. So people distrust populism because of the appeal to
elitists hate populism. That's what I found. David, on that bombshell.
Neither perspective is entirely wrong. It depends on the issue.
I'll leave the last words to you, David.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I should leave the last words to you.
Not at all. No.
Right.
Thank you very much for joining us.
No. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me on.